guys, I did not plan on doing a video for Moon Knight because I know nothing about Moon Knight except for what the MCU has introduced me to this character of Mark Spector. I was just planning on watching this show and just enjoying it. But after watching the first episode, I was like, I need to do a review for this show because it is so good. The finale hasn't aired yet as of me recording this section of the video. As of right now, WandaVision has like my heart because Wanda's my favorite. I love her and I love the whole like show of WandaVision. But honestly, Moon Knight might be my favorite MCU show. It just has so many things going for it. It is a superhero show, an MCU show, but it can stand on its own. There's not a whole lot of tying it to the MCU. There's a couple references here and there, but they're not like super like in your face references. They're in the background that you don't notice unless you're looking for all the Easter eggs, or the references that make sense to what's going on in the story and what's happening to Steven and Mark. Not necessarily an action-based show. It's more about like what's going on with Mark and Steven and figuring out how Steven came to be, Mark dealing with everything that he's done and really everything that he has to deal with in his past and really coming to terms with that and like really finding himself balance and trying to get balance with Steven and all of that. It's more of a character piece, like with WandaVision. It's more a character piece on not their origin story as a superhero, but their origin story of why they are the way they are, why they are the way they do certain things, why they act a certain way. It's more about who they are as a person than as instead of a superhero origin story, which I find so fascinating because at the end of the day, I love Marvel tackling the superhero origin story like we've seen, but I'm really here for the more character-driven stories of figuring out why this person is the way they are, what shaped and molded them as a human being versus what shaped and molded them to be a superhero. I mean, I love learning about like how Mark became Moon Knight and how like Wanda became the Scarlet Witch, but learning more about who these people are as individuals, as a human being, all of that stuff goes on. That to me is becoming, I feel like, an interesting character piece and an interesting like aspect, phase 4 of Marvel, and I'm really here for all of that. We barely see any of Moon Knight, like in the actual costume in this show. I'm okay with it because I'm really here for Steven and Mark's relationship and them really figuring that out and really learning about their dynamics together and separately and them like coming together and realizing they need to become one. Full disclosure, I don't know a ton about DID very much, so if I say anything incorrect or I give misinformation, please correct me in the comments section. But this is also an MCU show, so some things are probably inaccurate and some things are for show. Like for example, when Mark and Steven are like talking to each other through the mirror, one of them's in the mirror and like reflective objects, that is more of a visual for us as the audience because normally that would be going on in like Mark's head. Whereas I think the reason they did it with the mirrors and reflective objects is a visual for the audience to see what's actually going on in Mark's head. It feel really weird just to like have Oscar Isaac just talk to himself. I mean, he does that basically in the entire show. He basically talks to himself in the entire show, and he should win a fucking Oscar for that. There's so many times in the show where, like in the first episode, he's Steven, and then like the other personality takes over, and he has to do that switch. Like in episode 5, when he's on the street crying as Mark for his mom's death, he can't handle it. He's probably gonna have a panic attack. To like cope with that, Steven takes over, and Oscar Isaac just switches on a dime. He goes from this guy who's crying on the street to switches, and then he's this guy being like, "Hello, mom, hey." He's so good at switching between Mark and Steven. I'm sure when he does all those takes of like when him and Steven are in the same room in episode 4 at the end, it had to be him doing all of Mark's lines and then switching to do Steven's, and he's so good. But Oscar Isaac's performance in that is on a whole nother level, and if he does not win some type of award for that, I'm gonna be very upset. And I love that, like with Steven, a lot of us are in the dark. Like, we know there's kind of multiple personalities. At least I had like an inkling of that, knowing that, because I knew a little bit about, I Googled that part, like what is Moon Knight all about? With Steven though, a lot of us are in the dark too. Like, he has trouble falling asleep and sometimes doesn't want to fall asleep, and he also has that ankle wrist on his bed because we see that he doesn't remember things. Like when he finds out that girl has a date with him, he's like, I didn't ask you on a date. This cell phone in his flat, it's got a bunch of missed calls from Layla, and Layla's like, are you crazy, Mark? Like, what's going on? And Steven's like, who are you? That's the reason why he has the ankle wrist on. When he falls asleep, he knows that something's happening. Either he's getting transported somewhere or something's happening because all these little things, he's like, I don't remember doing that. When he loses a couple days after he tries to fall asleep and wakes up in like, I guess Germany Alps somewhere, doesn't know what's going on, and there's this conscious thing. He's losing so much time, like he lost a couple days. That's why he has the ankle wrist, is because he doesn't know what's going on. He says he sleepwalks. He thinks it's him sleepwalking. But as we find out, no, it is when he falls asleep honestly, Mark takes over and Mark does everything that Khonshu wants him to do, which honestly, Khonshu's an asshole at the end of the day. He took advantage of Mark. Because we found out that Mark is a mercenary. He was left for dead in Khonshu's tomb, and Khonshu took advantage of him, basically. Mark was in Khonshu's tomb because him and his buddy, mercenaries, and they had a job to raid a tomb, raid an archaeological dig site, right? At that archaeological dig site was Layla's dad. Now, we find out in episode 4 that Mark was there when Layla's dad was killed. I was hoping, I was like, please don't let it be Mark. Please tell me Mark did not kill Layla's dad. He did not. He was there. However, his buddy got greedy and executed everyone there, including Layla's dad, and then shot Mark and left him for dead. Buddy of the Year award, though, okay? I mean, I get why Layla's angry. I would be angry, too, because, like, Mark could have stopped that. He could have stopped this guy near the archaeological dig site, Khonshu's tomb. Mark was gonna, like, end his suffering, end his life. And Khonshu's like, I don't think so. I'm gonna have you be my new avatar. You're gonna seek out my vengeance. When he did say my vengeance, I was thinking in my head, like, I am vengeance, I am Batman, I am Khonshu, I am the knight. How could you not? I was like, are we in Batman territory? Is Khonshu Batman? But he sees Mark as a way for Khonshu, as a way for him to seek out his vengeance and continue on his vengeance. But Mark's broken. He's fractured. His mind is fractured, and for good reason. We learn in episode 5, which is the most emotional episode of this entire show, and I was just like a bawling frickin' mess. Took advantage of Mark. He saw Mark as this guy, as another way to seek out his vengeance, Khonshu's vengeance, to continue doing on what he did with Harrow, because we learned the bad guy, Harrow, who is now the servant of Ammit, Egyptian goddess, who judged people into the underworld. The thing about Khonshu is what he does is he judges people and seeks out his vengeance and punishment after the crime has already been committed. After the crime has been committed, that's when Khonshu punishes them. Whereas Ammit, she would judge people based on the deeds and the crimes they're gonna commit. Not crimes that they have committed, but she sees kind of the future, quote unquote. So Harrow is kind of her avatar now. That's what Harrow wants. Because Harrow was previously Khonshu's avatar. Harrow does not agree with what Khonshu's doing. He's like, the punishment comes too late. We need Ammit to judge people before they commit those crimes. Steven has a good point. Steven's like, what about a baby? Are you going to punish a baby for crimes they're going to do in the future? That's a very valid point. While I do not agree with Khonshu taking advantage of Mark and potentially going to wanting to go after Layla, next I was like, Khonshu, that's fucking creepy. I don't like that. But at the same time, it's like I don't condone Khonshu for taking advantage of Mark, who was clearly fractured and broken and need like help. Having Khonshu mixed a lot of that and having Mark be like his Moon Knight is not good for Mark, nor Steven, nor potentially Jake, who I believe is gonna come either at the end of this season or the next one. He's in that sarcophagus. He was there when Mark was glitching out and killed those guys in the roof in Cairo. I know that was Jake. It was not Mark, because Mark said no, he did not do it. And obviously Steven wouldn't kill anyone like that unless he absolutely had to. So it's gotta be Jake. Jake is also in that sarcophagus. He has to be there. Anyway, off the Jake train. But I also don't think Ammit's way of judging people is necessarily the right way to judge people either, because what if someone is gonna do something bad, but then last minute they change their mind? Does Ammit see that, or does she not? Because in Egyptian mythology, she judges people based on a crime they're going to commit, like they're unbalanced or they're balanced. She outweighs the good from the bad. Where does Harrow get off judging people based on the crimes they're going to commit or they're not going to commit? I know that like Ammit is a goddess, but at the same time, like what authority does she have in giving Harrow this task? Where does Harrow get off saying who is balanced and who is not? Who should die and who should not? At least with Khonshu, he can like see the whole situation play out of, this person did kill someone, but it was self-defense. Oh, that's okay. This person killed someone just to kill someone, they're a bad person. What Ammit's going about this and what Harrow's doing in service of her reminds me very much of the Winter Soldier. And Nick Fury's whole thing and Hydra's whole thing, like the helicarriers, of wanting to track the crime and track people. Cap's like, I thought this punishment came after the crime. It's sounding very much like that, and that was a whole bad situation. At the same time, like, I get where, like, Harrow's coming from, because, like, if you can prevent a killing, if you can prevent a horrible deed from happening, shouldn't you? But at the same time, it's like, what if that person has a change of heart? down the line before the crime happens. Like, both are valid. It's gray area. It's one of those questions of, like, does humanity deserve to live? The Eternals question, does humanity deserve a second chance, a time deserve to live? We've done a lot of fucked up shit in our, like, history, but also we've done some good things. We've created some things. It's that same question of who decides who dies and who lives, who decides what's a bad crime and what, you know what I mean? It's one of those questions, like, it's one of those gray areas, and I like that Marvel's slowly starting to tackle those more, like, thought-provoking questions or ideology, because obviously Harrow is, like, the bad guy, because, like, he wants to raise Amit, and he does, after they go to the tomb, which it was really cool to see that they brought, I love that when Marvel brings in, like, mythology from other cultures in, that's, like, real lore and history into, like, the MCU. For example, Amit's last avatar was Alexander the Great from Rome, but he thought of himself while he was in Egypt as an Egyptian, like, deity, as a god in a sense. That's why he is in that sarcophagus. That's why that tomb of the pharaoh is for Alexander the Great, last avatar of Amit. So the Amit statue, the same one that Khonshu is imprisoned in after him and Stephen moved the sky back 200 years ago, which by the way, that whole scene was gorgeous. Like, when him and Khonshu were doing that, I was like, this is beautiful. This is stunning. That scene, and anytime Khonshu is, like, in the hallway and the lights are flickering, he's almost like a horror movie character. When they're in the storage unit area, Khonshu's in the hallway, then he ends up being in front of Stephen. Khonshu turns around and his head is illuminated by that light. That was some creepy, like, hints of horror movie aspects, but it was so flipping cool. Khonshu is very intimidating. He can also be a bit of, like, okay, shut up. But he's very intimidating when you first meet him. The hallway in the apartment complex and in that storage unit hallway. God damn, he was scary. This is really kind of the first time Stephen and Khonshu are kind of, like, working together. For a lot of the time, Khonshu's like, Stephen, screw off, you are messing with things. Like, give the body back to Mark. Like, even in episode 1, when Stephen wakes up in the Alps, he's like, get out of here, worm. Give the body back to Mark. Mark is essentially his Moon Knight, his, like, soldier. Stephen is just there. Stephen's trying to be kept in the dark. But the more Stephen figures out and tries to figure out what's going on, the more Khonshu's like, this guy is interfering and disturbing what I have going on with Mark. I don't want it. Get out of here. That's why he's, like, kind of, like, a little crueler to Stephen in the beginning, is because Mark's protecting him, which I read somewhere underneath, like, a thread of Moon Knight theories, is that the reason why Mark is protecting Stephen, he's protecting him like a little brother. And after episode 5, that's a deep cut, man. It makes total sense why Mark is protecting Stephen, because he kind of sees Stephen as, like, an innocent little brother. He doesn't want him to know the truth. He doesn't want to know the truth about Mark being a mercenary, what happened to them when they were a kid, with their brother, and their mom. He wants to shield Stephen from all of that, and so, like, treating him and protecting him like a little brother after what happened to Mark's brother is really sad and really deep, but I feel like it's a way for Mark to kind of get a do-over, to get what he lost so long ago at such an early age. I feel like it's a way for him to have another brother. Okay, I know it's like Mark's body, quote-unquote, and, like, Stephen's just a personality, but I like Stephen more than Mark. Then again, we are with Stephen right away in the first episode. Like, we are seeing everything from his perspective, even though he isn't Mark's body, but it's still Stephen's, like, in control at the moment. Like, half the time before the show, I knew what Oscar Isaac sounded like. Half the time, I was like, are you sure he's not British? Because, like, he's doing a pretty damn good British accent, in my opinion. And I just love the quirkiness of Stephen. I love that kind of like a nerd of Egyptian mythology, which, by the way, I fucking love Egyptian mythology. All the sprinkles of Egyptian mythology, just like how episode 4, especially episode 5, became a shit ton about Egyptian mythology and, like, the afterlife and the fields of reeds and the unbalance and the balance, and you have Tawete come in like the hippo goddess of, like, motherhood. Oh my god, I'm living for this. I know what you're talking about, Stephen. I'd talk to you about Egyptian history all fucking day if I could. He did kind of lose his job in a cool way, fighting off a jackal, but then again, like, it's not only Stephen's fault, because, like, Mark takes over in that bathroom, beats the shit out of that jackal, but then we get that cool sequence of him, you see the back of Moon Knight beating the shit out of that jackal, and then it turns around, and there's Moon Knight, and then he walks to the camera in costume. I'm like, that's so fucking cool. The Moon Knight costume is so fucking cool. I just love that it is, like, wrapped in mummy wrap. Like, obviously Moon Knight has an Egyptian god in him, so it would make sense for him to be, like, have mummy linen in him. And I love that in episode 2, when Mark takes over again, the costume kind of, like, over his head, like, starts wrapping around his head in single, like, strands. That was so fucking awesome. The MCU is killing it with their new superhero costumes lately, and this is no exception. It does have the cloak in episode 3 when he jumps up in the air and flies down, does go in the shape of a crescent moon, which is fucking cool. Like I said, I don't know a ton about Moon Knight or Mr. Knight. A lot of people I think were disappointed with the way Mr. Knight was, how he was revealed in the show. But honestly, Mr. Knight being Steven's kind of costume, I thought it was really cool. Like when Steven falls out that window, there's the shot of him falling, and then he does the superhero landing and he's in the Mr. Knight costume. That's so flippin' cool! And Mark's like, you can't handle this, and Steven's like, hey, fucking watch me, mate. Starts like roughing up, insulting the jackal, like, hey, come over here, you overgrown coyote. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. My name is Steven with a V. Steven, you are fighting supernatural jackal creature that no one else can see but you. I don't think it's time for one-liners and catchphrases, but go off, I guess. I'm not gonna judge you. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. My name is Steven with a V. I don't know why it was so... But episode 4, obviously they go to the tomb. Why do we keep doing this trope? Like, I get it. I get it. Like, if you found out someone close to you did something awful, you'd want to confront them right away. I get it. I probably would too. But you are literally on a time crunch to get the statue of Ammit away from Harrow. Why would you just stop? Like, want to have this conversation here in a tomb when you know Harrow is like right on your tail? What? Why? What? Layla, I know you're upset. I'd probably do the exact same thing in your shoes, but like, now's not the time. You could have gotten that statue thing away from Harrow, been out of there, and Mark probably would have never had to get shot. Mark is dead. Technically, he's not. And the next thing we know, we are seeing Mark in a white, probably a mental hospital. And I'm just like, what the fuck? And here's where I started like believing that everything we had seen previous was all a dream, or just made up in Mark's head. Because you see references. You see references of a cupcake to the cupcake truck. You see another person drawing a picture of what looks like Khonshu's Moon Knight toy. Layla's there, probably another patient or something. So he probably could have made up that whole idea that he was married to her. He has those sandals that we saw before. And in his office is a statue of Ammit's head, the alligator head. And then there's a poster of like those mountains, like those Alps that he was in episode 1 in Germany. I'm thinking all cylinders in my head are leading to this whole time Mark has been in a mental institute, and everything that we have seen in episodes 1, 2, and 3, and for most of episode 4, have all been a lie, all made up. On one hand, that would be so fucking like insane and crazy. Think all of that is not real, but at the same time, it would be like, really, Marvel? Really? How do you distinguish what's real from what's reality, what's real from your imagination, from what you've created? Who's to say what we're living in right now is not made up, is reality? Who's to say? But I just kept thinking that the more and more that went on, I was like, did everything we see previously become a lie? But then it gets even weirder. After we see Mark find a sarcophagus, someone in it, and it turns out to be Steven. Like, Steven's an actual human. Like, Mark and Steven are now separate from each other. So we're not in a mental institution now, because why would we see Steven out of Mark's body and a separate Mark? Like, that would not make sense. I will say, when they hugged though, they were so happy to see each other and they hugged. I was so happy. I was like, oh, you guys. And this is where I started to think maybe the mental hospital is his version of the underworld or the afterlife. The underworld recognizes both of them as like separate entities, and they're also in kind of like maybe this void of the in-between because they're unbalanced. Turns out that's kind of the case. Mark and Steven walk up to this door, and out comes hippo. It turns out to be Tawedi, the Egyptian hippo goddess of motherhood. I was like, oh my god, I know her! She's kind of there as a guide to help souls become balanced, taking unbalanced souls to weigh their hearts. If they are balanced, they will go to the field of reed, which is kind of like heaven. If they are unbalanced, they will be taken by the duats of the sand and be left to wander in an abyss for all eternity. In Steven and Mark's case, she grabs their hearts and weighs them, and they are very freaking unbalanced. They have to kind of work through Mark's memories, really become balanced. And that whole section of the episode is just kind of like, episode 5, I'm just like, we finally figure out that when Mark was a kid, he and his brother went to this cave, and Mark was like, it's gonna be okay. and it started raining, and his brother drowned, and Mark felt so guilty because he felt like it was his fault, but he was only a kid, he didn't know any better. And then his mom wishes Steven was never born, saying that you were always jealous of your brother, and she wanted his brother back instead of Mark. And then she started beating him as a child, and that's when he created Steven, or why Steven came to be. That personality is because Mark he created Steven as a way to not have to deal with the trauma, have to like push the trauma away. He created Steven this different personality so that Steven could experience all the happy things that Mark wanted. A mom that loved him, a mom that cared about him, and he didn't want Steven to see any of that or be a part of any of that. That's why he created Steven, so that Steven could have a normal life without the trauma. Oh my God. Oh my God. I feel so bad for Mark for having to go through all of that. And I feel so bad for Steven because Steven thought he was like, it was his body and he was the original. But it's like, just because Steven is a personality that Mark created to not have to live through the trauma or want to have a normal personality that didn't deal with the trauma doesn't mean Steven isn't real. Steven is just as much a part of Mark as Mark is a part of Mark. He said the scales are unbalanced with both of their hearts because they're acting as separate entities. They need to become one, and that's why I think her telling them to live and look through all of their memories and Steven to find out the truth is what Steven needs to do. He needed to find out the truth in order for them to then become one or get on the same scale, because they both want really the same thing in a sense. And I feel so bad for Steven because like I know he didn't probably want to know the truth, but it's like it's better to know the truth than be in the dark clearly as we've seen. But it's just, I feel so bad for Mark, everything he had to go through, and I feel so bad for Steven now, and it's just like, oh my gosh. And Tawani mentioned the ancestral plane from Black Panther. They're kind of like underworlds, and she mentions how there's different like places and different pathways and different like passages of the underworld. So I'm guessing there's like different versions, like the Egyptian one is the boat going to the fields, and then you have like the underworld, like the typical underworld with like Hades from Greek mythology, and then you have Valhalla, which is not hell, but it's kind of the afterlife in Norse mythology. So it's really cool to see that there's different versions of the underworld, like there's different versions of hell, or different versions of heaven for different mythologies and different cultures. So I love that. He was trying to protect Steven, and I feel bad for Steven because it's like he thought he had a good relationship with his mom, but he never did. And, like, she's dead, and Steven has to come to terms with that, and he's just heartbroken, and I feel bad. Like, the whole reason why Mark created Steven, like, that traumatic moment, all of those traumatic things that happened, it's so believable and so, like, realistic that after Mark's brother died, Mark kind of felt guilty about it, and then the way his mom started to deteriorate, and that she took up drinking. She was always nasty and made these awful comments and snide remarks to Mark, to the point where Mark couldn't take it anymore, and he kept thinking, like when he goes up to his room on his birthday, after his mom was like, you were always jealous of your brother, he runs upstairs, and he just curls up to him and ball and says, that's not my mother, that's not my mother, and then Steven pops up. And I think he created Steven after all of those times, not wanting to believe that's his mom, not wanting to live those traumatic moments or deal with that pain, that suffering, and he created Steven because of it. He created Steven so that Steven had this ideal of a perfect relationship with his mother. And yes, while he was getting beaten, it was Steven, but Steven thought he had a good relationship with his mother, and Mark didn't want Steven to, like, see that side or deal with that pain. But it's just like, Mark should have never had to deal with that pain either. His mother should have never beaten him, should have never done those things to him. Like, she could have still had a good relationship with Steven or with Mark, but she chose not to. Again, you were only a child, Mark. You didn't know that your brother was gonna drown in that cave. Even if you should have never brought him in that cave, you didn't know. You were a child yourself. Love that Steven is trying to comfort Mark and say all those things she said, she's wrong. It's not your fault, and it's not because Mark was a child. Could you do that to Steven? Why would you do that to Steven? He tries to save Mark by beating up those unbalanced souls, and he gets thrown over the boat, and he turns to sand, an unbalanced soul. Not Steven, no! Steven, this personality he created, wanting to save him, like, be like, I can't do this without Steven, I can't. Showing the scales and realizing that Steven is a part of Mark. Just as much as Mark is Mark. Steven is a part of you. Without him, you are unbalanced. Clearly the scales are telling you, without him, you are unbalanced. You need him. And Steven needs you, Mark. Next week is the finale, episode 6. I truly hope that they are able to wrap up everything in a somewhat nice bow. I don't know how they're going to wrap up everything nicely, and I'm a little nervous. I was a little nervous of the season finale of Moon Knight not sticking the landing, and for the most part, I think it did a good job of sticking the landing. Was it a perfect finale? No. Did it feel a little rushed? Yeah. This episode should have been 2, maybe even 3 episodes. I feel like scenes that should have lingered in the last episode kind of felt a little like fast-paced and rushed. Does it hinder my experience of the show? I would still say that Moon Knight is possibly my favorite MCU show. Did it turn into kind of a like third act General Marvel like superhero like big fights? Yeah, I really liked it because it's literally Amit and Khonshu are fighting each other. Well, I have the moon god, goddess Amit fighting each other. That was pretty fucking cool to me. In tune with Khonshu fighting Amit, we have Harrow fighting Mark, because Mark ends up coming back. That whole like sequence of Mark coming back and like reconciling with Steven, it did feel a little rushed, but at the same time, I was all here for Mark's speech he gave Steven. He tells Twede, it's not fair that I get to live in peace in the fields of reeds, and like Steven's just left there. So he goes back for Steven, and he gives Steven this whole speech about he's like, I was never alone. I never survived alone. I always had you. I was never alone. I had you. I always had a friend. I always had a brother. And he's like, I need you, Steven. The only real superpower I ever had was you, Steven. Mark. Stop it, Mark. You're making me feel things, Mark. I love when Mark awakens from being dead. Khonshu finds them. Mark and Steven finally figured out how to do this thing. They just switch back and forth. No care in the world. No conversation needed. They know at this point to work together. It just happens naturally. And while I do think there should have been more build up to that, and I feel like that could have been another episode, or half an episode diving into that, of them like talking about it and figuring out we need to come together, we need to work together, here's how things are gonna go. We both know that we want to be in control, but we have to like negotiate and like come together and just work together. Communication is key in any relationship. Even with Steven and Mark, it's key. Could have been longer, but I still really love that whole sequence. Khonshu's kind of taken aback. I wasn't talking to you, Steven Grant. Steven's like, you get both of us, mate. That's how it works. Deal with it, bitch. I just love Mark and Steven switching between each other. Like, it's so naturally. Like, when Layla gets her costume because Twede talks through a dead man, and Layla ends up getting superpowers, and she's these really cool fucking, like, iris wings. I'm just like, that is so cool. When Mark sees Layla, he's like, Layla, oh my gosh, hi. And then Steven, like, comes out, he's like, oh my god, your suit, your costume, it looks so cool. Even when they're fighting, Mark will be Moon Knight in like with the cape, and he's just fighting, and all of a sudden Steven pops up. I love that Steven gets to be so badass in this episode. He takes those metal rods that he has and just starts like whipping them at people and beating the crap out of people. Go, Steven, you go. At one point he beats up Harrow. He gets away and he just dusts off his suit like, I can't get my suit dirty. That's a sin. When Mark comes back, he has that scene where he transforms, and you see like it looks a little CGI. You can tell it looks a little CGI, but I don't care because it looks really cool. Bands start going up his arms. The mummy wrap just goes around his entire chest. Moon weapon pop up, and then his hood pop up. Every costume transformation, whether it be the Moon Knight costume or the Mr. Knight costume, so flippin' cool. I can't get over the Moon Knight costume. We've barely seen it in the show, but I love it. I feel like this episode is just like teases of Jake Lockley, because we'll get to the end credits scene. All of a sudden, Harrow has like Mark. The next minute, Mark glitches out, and Harrow's on the ground like beaten almost to death. Mark's like, what happened? And Steven's like, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. You know that had to be Jake Lockley. Obviously, Mark wouldn't do it, because he's like, I don't really want to kill people anymore, as established by when they try to put Amit in Harrow's body, sealing her away. Khonshu's like, you gotta kill her and Harrow. Mark does not want to kill anyone anymore. He's like, I I'm done. I'm done. Our deal is done. You agreed to let me go, so let me and Steven go. But he doesn't really. We see Harrow, which looks like a mental hospital of some sort. They roll Harrow out to this limo, and I'm like, is this? In the limo is sitting Khonshu in what appears to be like Mr. Knight's suit. And he's like, oh, Mark thought I wanted his wife. No, Mark's more broken and fractured than you think. Meet my driver, Jake Lockley. Are you serious? The glass door opens. It is Mark or Jake Lockley. We don't see him shoot Harrow, but he aims a gun at him and we see gunshots go off. So I'm assuming he's dead since we didn't see him get shot or the body. I don't think he's 100% dead. Jake Lockley is here, which makes me wonder. So I believe there has to be a season 2. I feel like after we got this reveal, we have to find some way to like reconcile with Jake. At this point, I feel like Khonshu did this on purpose. I feel like Khonshu released Mark and Steven, but not Jake. I feel like Jake wants, but Jake doesn't have a costume, but I feel like Mark and Steven, more so Mark, was Moon Knight's Moon Knight. I feel that Jake is more of like his personal show for maybe his assistant too. Jake wants to stay with Moon Knight, whereas Mark and Steven don't. Khonshu's putting on this show that, oh yeah, I released you, Mark and Steven, but not Jake, which begs the question, is Jake gonna have some mess up a little bit, and are Mark and Steven gonna be on to him, and they're gonna be like, what the fuck, Khonshu? Not only did Khonshu take advantage of Mark, he lied to Mark, and now he's still using Mark. Khonshu, you're really cool, but also you're an asshole. But yeah, those are all of my thoughts on season 1 of Moon Knight. It is fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I like the last episode probably more than most people will, but I don't care. It's not the first time I've really enjoyed something that majority of people or half the people did not like. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts on Moon Knight are down in the comment section. I will see you guys with another video very soon. Bye guys!